everyone, and welcome to a new book video. Today I'll be sharing some of my very favourite comfort reads with you, and I've been really looking forward to doing this video because I am, of course, a huge fan of cosy and comforting books. I founded the Comfort Book Club 3 years ago now, so I know that many of us have been enjoying reading comfort books together over the past few years, but I thought it would be handy to have a video in which I list some of my ultimate favourites for your reference. I do think that comfort books often are undeservedly neglected. I think that there's so much pleasure to be got from a comfort book, and sometimes there could be a bit of a snobby attitude to them. But for me, reading is always a source of huge comfort and joy, and that's one of the main reasons that I love to read. So comfort books matter a lot to me, and I wanted to share a quote with you. It's by Martin Latham, and it's from his essay on comfort books in his book, The Bookseller's Tale. And he says, "The discovery of a comfort book is like the occasion of falling in love, often an unforgettable experience." That is one of the very first entries I wrote into my Commonplace book, because I thought how true that is. I think it says a lot about who you are as a person and as a reader, what your favourite comfort books are. What are those books that you turn to in times of stress or when you just want a lovely cozy read? So I thought I'd share some of my very favourites with all of you. I love books that make me laugh. As we're going into cozy season with the approach of autumn and winter, there's nothing I like more than a book that will really put a smile on my face that I can just curl up with in the long evenings and have a good chuckle over. So my go-to choice for funny fiction is P.G. Wodehouse. I adore his Jeeves and Wooster series, but to be honest, I love all of his books. I love the Blandings Castle books, I love his short stories. There's just so much of his work that I love, and he never fails to make me laugh. One of my very favourites of his is Joy in the Morning. It's a Jeeves and Wooster story, and it's just absolutely hilarious. He really was such a comic genius, and I love to listen to these books as well as to read them. One of my favourite things to do is put on a Jeeves and Wooster book read by Jonathan Cecil, maybe if I'm cooking soup or something like that in the autumn, and it just makes the whole cooking and washing up process go so much faster because I absolutely love listening to Jonathan Cecil reading these books. So a huge favourite of mine. And then another really funny classic is Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. This is the beautiful folio edition that's quite old now, but I found it secondhand, and I think it's just gorgeous. It's illustrated by Paul Cox. And again, this is absolutely hilarious. It's a real sort of late Victorian classic about three men friends and their dog Montmorency as they go off on an adventure boating along the Thames, and lots of rather funny incidents and accidents happen along the way. I absolutely love this one. This is another one that I love to listen to on Audible, and it's just hilarious. And then another book that always makes me laugh is Map and Lucia by E.F. Benson. I adore this series. They're just hilarious. They're set in a town called Tilling, which is a fictionalized Rye, and I love the setting of the books. But what really makes these is the antagonism between Lucia and Miss Mapp. Both of these characters want to be the Queen of Tilling, and they each try to one-up the other. And it's just very, very funny. One of my other favourite books I turn to whenever I need a bit of cheering up. Then a couple of books in diary form that are hilarious. One is The Diary of a Provincial Lady by E.M. Delafield. This is such a classic as well. It's about a woman and her sort of everyday cares. It's set in the interwar years, and there are very humorous passages in her diary about her struggles of daily life, of being a mother and a wife, coping with the neighbours, all of that kind of thing. And it's a very sort of quiet, gentle humour, but it's a real favourite of mine. And then another brilliant classic, especially if you love something like Three Men in a Boat, then do give The Diary of a Nobody a try. This is a great Victorian classic as well by George and Weedon Grossmith. This is also written in diary form, and it's absolutely hilarious. It's the diary of a very ordinary man, a nobody, but it's about his life and his family life, and it's a very sort of quiet book again, but there are some really wonderful humorous moments in it. Now, another author that I just love, who's always a brilliant comfort read, is D.E. Stevenson. And her book, Mrs. Tim of the Regiment, is one of my very favourites. This again is told in diary form, and it's just a really sweet, charming story. A real classic comfort read for me. I absolutely adore this one. And D.E. Stevenson in general is a great pick for cosy reads. Then finally, I also love this book, Henrietta's War by Joyce Dennis. If you like Diary of a Provincial Lady and Mrs. Tim of the Regiment, then definitely give this one a try. It's set during World War II, it's written in letter format, and there are very, very funny moments in this book as well. So again, another one that I love to turn to when I need something to make me laugh. Before I talk about the next book, I wanted to tell you about my Serious Readers offer code. I'm so thrilled that Serious Readers are very kindly sponsoring today's video. As you know, I'm a huge fan of their reading lights. I've spoken about them many times before. I have their high definition floor light, which I love and use all the time. So I'm really pleased to have an offer code with Serious Readers that I can share with you. My offer code is Miranda, all capital letters, Miranda24. And if you use that offer code, it will get you £100 off any of the high definition lights by Serious Readers, as well as free shipping within the UK. Autumn has come early here in Yorkshire. I've already had to turn the heating on, but what I absolutely love to do in these autumn evenings is to get cosy with a blanket and just curl up with a really good book. I read a lot every evening. I also like to journal in the evenings, and as the days are starting to get shorter already, my reading light is even more important to me. I use my Serious light every day, and having a really good reading light is very important to my life. There are lots of reasons why I love my Serious light, but one of the main ones is because of the amazing light quality. The high definition lights by Serious Readers are special because they feature something called daylight wavelength technology, which essentially replicates the daylight spectrum as closely as technically possible. So when I'm reading with my Serious light, I feel like I'm reading in a pool of natural light, or at least as close to natural light as you can get. I also like that I can adjust the width of the beam of the light as well as the brightness levels, so I just get the perfect amount of light that's right for me. I myself have the cordless high definition floor model. I live in a very old house and there aren't a lot of sockets around where I can plug in a light. So I love the fact that I can just pick up my cordless light and carry it wherever I need it, whether I'm writing in my journal upstairs in my bedroom or reading in the living room downstairs. I can have my light wherever I want it, and that's what makes the cordless option a brilliant choice for me. So if you're also keen to have a great reading light, then do take advantage of my offer code. Again, that is Miranda, all capital letters, Miranda24, and that gets you £100 off any of the high definition lights by Serious Readers, as well as free shipping within the UK. I'll put all of the details, including my offer code, in the video description box down below, so you can check out the link and all of the details there. But now let's get back to my book recommendations. Okay, so now for my next comfort book recommendation, which is Venetia by Georgette Hare. Georgette Hare is definitely also another writer who always makes me chuckle. I love her Regency romances. I'm also a fan of her mysteries, but her Regency romances are the absolute favourites of mine, and they are perfect comfort reads. Venetia is one of my favourites. I also love The Nonsuch, which we read for the Comfort Book Club, and Arabella is another favourite of mine, as well as Frederica. But if you love Jane Austen, if you love Regency romances generally, then do give Georgette Hare a try. And what's great about her is she was very prolific, so there are lots of books of hers that you can enjoy. So definitely Georgette Hare is one of my ultimate comfort reads. I read so many of these in my early 20s when I was doing exams every springtime, and I would always turn to Georgette Hare to read at bedtime. They always calmed me down, and ever since then these have just been my ultimate comfort reads. Now, an author who my mum introduced me to is the wonderful Miss Read. Miss Read was one of my mum's absolute favourite comfort reads, and she introduced me to her books. I love them as well. Both the Fairacre and Thrush Green series by Miss Read are very charming. They're all about English village life essentially, and the life of a school teacher in particular, if you read the Fairacre series. Again, they're very quiet, they've got a very gentle pace to them, but that's part of the charm and the comforting nature of these books for me. So I love them, and I do especially have a soft spot for Miss Read's Christmas stories, which I think you can enjoy even if you haven't read her other books. A favourite of mine is No Holly for Miss Quinn. I love to either read or to listen to audiobooks of her Christmas stories every December. They're just a part of my Christmas tradition now, and they are wonderful, comforting stories. So a huge favourite of mine. Then another author I love, who is sadly out of print, but you can find her books secondhand, is O. Douglas. And Pink Sugar is one of my favourites of hers. O. Douglas was a pen name of Anna Buchan. She was sister to John Buchan, and she set many of her books in her beloved Scotland. If you like D.E. Stevenson, then I would definitely recommend giving O. Douglas a try. She did a lot of gentle romances that are rather in the style of D.E. Stevenson. Pink Sugar is a good example of that. Some of her books are quite sad. This one isn't, but some are, and I've definitely needed tissues sometimes when reading her books. But in general, they're really comforting, love-filled books, and definitely class as comfort reads for me. Now, Agatha Christie is of course one of my favourite writers, as I'm a huge fan of Golden Age crime, and these are real comfort reads for me as well. I especially love her Miss Marple mysteries, and I think you really can't go wrong trying the Miss Marple short stories. I have Miss Marple, the complete short stories here, and this volume is always a classic comfort read for me. A lot of the stories are about a group of friends who sort of gather by the fire and they tell each other mysteries, and the other people have to guess the solution. And Miss Marple, of course, always gets it right, whereas no one else does. And they're just brilliantly done. So this is exactly the kind of book that I like to curl up with by the fire as we head into the colder months. This is a real wonderful comfort read for that time. And with that in mind too, I also really like these seasonal short story collections that have been coming out of Agatha Christie's short stories. Autumn Chills is of course the perfect one for cozy season, so this is one that I've pulled off my shelf and will be dipping into over the next few weeks as well. Next, I wanted to highlight a publisher who publishes a lot of brilliant comfort reads that are real favourites of mine, and that is of course Dean Street Press and their Furrowed Middle Brow imprint in particular. So I wanted to show some of my very favourite comfort read titles, and I love all of the Susan Scarlett romances. Dean Street Press have republished all of them. Susan Scarlett was the pen name of Noel Stratfield, who you might recognise from Ballet Shoes and lots of other wonderful children's books. They're all comfort reads for me too. But I also love these really light-hearted romances that she wrote under the name Susan Scarlett. And a favourite of mine is Babbicom's. This is about a young girl who gets a job in a very big department shop, and of course there's a romance that happens as well. I love all of the details about the department store. I just find those details really fascinating. That's one of the reasons I actually really enjoy Susan Scarlett books, is because it's filled with period detail, and I really enjoy that aspect to her stories. But they're also just very sweet, gentle romances, so I do recommend this one. Another author I really like who has been republished by Dean Street Press is Elizabeth Fair. With winter coming on, I thought I would in particular recommend A Winter Away. Again, this is just a gentle romance, but it's also full of sort of details of village life, and that's one of the reasons that I really enjoy this one. Then another huge favourite of mine is The Lark by E. Nesbit. Again, E. Nesbit is someone who is more famous for her children's books like The Railway Children and Five Children and It, but this was a novel that she published for adults, and it's utterly charming. It's about some cousins who realise that their guardian has run off with their inheritance, essentially. So they only just have enough money to move to the countryside into a small little cottage, and they try to earn their own livings. But it's a really light-hearted but lovely book, and there are some deeper depths to this story as well, which I really love. So one of my absolute favourite comfort reads. And then, of course, Dean Street Press have also republished a lot of D. Stevenson novels, which is wonderful. So there's so many that you can choose from. This was a particular favourite of mine, Spring Magic. Just a lovely romance, and I also love books set in Scotland, so this is a favourite of mine for that reason too. But there's a lot of D. Stevenson that you can enjoy having a look through on the Dean Street Press website, so that's wonderful. If you have read and enjoyed Babbicom's, then a wonderful book to read next would be Business as Usual by Jane Oliver and Anne Stafford. This is a novel written as letters. It's also got some really charming illustrations all the way through it that I love, and it's about a young woman who has moved to London and has got a job working in a big department store. It's a sort of fictionalized Selfridges, and she manages to sort of move up the ranks, and what's brilliant is she actually gets a job in the sort of library section of this department store. So there's a lot about books in some ways in this story too, which I love. There's a romance in it which doesn't go quite according to plan, and it's just a very funny and sweet story. So another real favourite of mine. This one was republished by Handheld Press, and that reminded me that there was another Handheld Press book that I think makes a brilliant comfort read. It's a book for children, but I think adults can enjoy it too, and it's Jane's Country Year by Malcolm Saville. It says, a novel of 1940s English farming life and a young girl's discovery of the natural world around her. This book is one of those that goes month by month through the year, and it's just a really, really charming little story filled with Malcolm Saville's wonderful sense of place and appreciation of the natural world, and that's one of the reasons that I really enjoy this story. Then a couple of classics that I adore and that are huge comfort reads for me. Of course, I have to mention Jane Austen at some point in this video, and I think my ultimate comfort read when it comes to Jane Austen is Pride and Prejudice. I mean, I adore all of Jane Austen's books, but if I'm ever feeling particularly low or a bit stressed, then it's Pride and Prejudice that I turn to the most. It's such a light, bright and sparkling novel. It just can't fail to cheer you up, or at least it can't fail to cheer me up. So that's why it's one of my very favourite comfort books. And again, I love to either read this or listen to the audiobook version. I have the version read by Lindsay Duncan, and I think she's absolutely brilliant. So yes, ultimate comfort read here for me. And another classic comfort read for me is Anthony Trollope, particularly his Barchester books, especially Barchester Towers. That's one of my very favourites from the series, but it starts with The Warden, and I really love reading them all. I actually started a bit of a Christmas tradition, or what will become a real Christmas tradition for me, last Christmas, when over Christmas and Boxing Day I reread Barchester Towers, and it was just such a lovely cozy thing to do. I just loved spending that time when everything was really quiet and lovely over Christmas to just immerse myself in the world of Anthony Trollope, and I really enjoyed that, and I'm going to do the same this Christmas. I'll reread one of the books from the Barchester series, and I'm really looking forward to that. Next is another comfort classic, and that's All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot. This is the first in the series, but I love all of the books in James Herriot's series. I really recommend reading them all. I know so many people love the new TV series as well as the old one, but if you've never read the books, then I highly encourage you to do so. They're absolutely hilarious. They never fail to cheer me up because they always make me laugh, but they're always such sweet, life-affirming books too. And I just love James Herriot's writing. And of course, because they're all set in Yorkshire, that makes them extra special to me as well. And then another classic is The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. This will always be one of my favourite comfort books. It's about a group of women who, for the most part, barely know each other or don't know each other at all, but they decide to go on holiday together in Italy. They answer an advertisement in the newspaper about a small castle that's to let in the month of April in Italy, and they club together so that they can afford to go. And what happens while they're there on holiday is miraculous in terms of how it transforms all of their lives. But it's just such a beautiful story, always a favourite of mine, and I think it would bring anyone comfort. So that's a real favourite. And then I do love The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets by Eva Rice. This is set soon after World War II, and it's about the advent of the rock and roll era. It's told from the perspective of a teenage girl and her best friend, and it's very much a coming of age story and a story about first love and young love. And it's also got a brilliant setting of sort of crumbling country mansion, which I always really like. But there's a lot of humour in this book too, and it's just such a light-hearted, fabulous story, wonderful comfort read. If you like books about books, then you just can't go wrong with 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. One of my absolute favourite books. I love this series of letters between the author and Frank, a bookseller at a bookshop on 84 Charing Cross Road in London. This is a real ode to friendship as well as to literature, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful story. So this is always a book I return to when I'm in need of some comfort. And then I also love the writing of Paul Gallico. He's written a few brilliant comfort reads. Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris is one of my favourite books of his. I've spoken about it many times before. There was a film of it recently as well. So that's a wonderful comfort read. But I also wanted to talk about Coronation, which I think is such a quiet gem of a novel, and I don't hear many people discussing this one, and I think it really is charming. It's set on the Queen's coronation day in 1953, and it's about a working class family from Sheffield who have foregone their usual annual holiday by the seaside so that they can afford champagne tickets to go and see the Queen's coronation. The day does not at all go according to plan, and what could in fact end up being a complete disaster of a day is saved by the family's love and respect for each other. It's such a heartwarming, tender novella really. It's so short, you could read it in barely any time, and I so recommend it. It's just a really sweet, charming little book. And then talking about a family having an annual seaside holiday, I think a lot of you will know what's coming, and that is The Fortnight in September by R.C. Sherriff. This again is about a very ordinary, a very middle-class family who love to take their annual holiday by the sea every September. And this book is about 1 year and one of their holidays by the sea. And again, it's a very quiet, gentle story. Not much happens in it, but it speaks so much to family love and connection and small joys and the pleasures of just being alive, even when you have a very simple life. And it's just a really charming, beautiful story. So a favourite of mine and a brilliant comfort read. And then another huge classic in the comfort book genre is of course Rosamund Pilcher. And one of my absolute favourites of hers is Winter Solstice. Now, this book definitely deals with darker themes like grief and death, and you definitely might want some tissues sometimes during this book, but ultimately it's such a life-affirming story. It's a wonderful Christmas story. It's filled with hope as well as sadness. It's about the power of friendship, the power of creating your own family. It's just a beautiful book and a wonderful volume to curl up with in December. This is another annual December read for me. I just adore picking up this book at Christmas time, and it never gets old. I really love this story. Next, I wanted to share a book that is sadly no longer available. It's out of print, but if you can find a second-hand copy, then I really recommend trying to hunt one out. That's Greensleeves by Beryl Netherclift. I adore this book. It's a kind of part memoir, part fictionalized, part a collection of poetry and little stories. It's a real mix, but Beryl Netherclift has some absolutely beautiful passages of nature writing in this book. It's about the writer's experience of going and staying on a farm as she's trying to write, and her discovery of farm life and the family that she's living with, as well as the beautiful surrounding countryside. Like I said, it's just full of some wonderful descriptive passages of the natural landscape, and I just find it utterly charming, and it's become a real favourite comfort read for me. I really love it. And if you love Alison Utley, then I think you should give Greensleeves a try. I, of course, am a huge fan of Alison Utley's writing. I have her book, The Country Child, right here, and this is one of her children's books, although absolutely adults can read and enjoy this too. I also love her collections of essays for adults. This is such a favourite book of mine. Again, it's set on a farm. It's a fictionalized account of the author's own childhood, and it's got beautiful descriptions of farm life and old English country customs, as well as the surrounding landscape of Derbyshire. It's a very special read and I really love it, but I also recommend Greensleeves if you're an Alison Utley fan. Now, I love the writing of H.E. Bates, talking about wonderful writers of the landscape. Then I love H.E. Bates's Darling Buds of May series, but I also love his non-fiction writing. One of my favorites is Through the Woods, which is his essays on woods and how precious they are to the English countryside. His writing is so lyrical. I absolutely love it. So this is a real favorite of mine. And then an American writer I love a lot is Gladys Taber. One of my favorites of her books, though I love many of them, is Still Meadow Sampler. And again, this is a lovely seasonal read. It tells of Gladys Taber's life living on an old farm in New England. And she again is just a wonderful observer of the natural landscape, of her garden. There's just so much charm to her writing. She also talks a bit about what she's cooking and the passing seasons and year. So another wonderful writer who I really love and turn to for comfort. And then another one is Claire Layton, and I really like this new anthology of her writing called Rural Life. This is a collection of her writings on landscape and country living from various different books by her. It features her truly stunning illustrations as well. It's just such a delight to read this book. Some is about her time in America, some is about her life in England, but there are lovely seasonal essays and passages in this that are a real delight. If you love nature writing, then this is definitely worth reading. And another similar anthology is Next to Nature by Ronald Blythe. I love Ronald Blythe's writing of his time in a farmhouse in Suffolk. He was such a wonderful writer, and I do love this anthology. It's a really good, comprehensive introduction to his work if you're new to him. But even if you're not and you're a big fan of his writing, then this is just a lovely anthology to maybe have on your bedside table, and that will take you all through the year and all through the seasons. So I do love this book. And then finally, I wanted to share a few children's books because for me, children's books are my ultimate comfort reads. I mean, they're the books that I really return to over and over again. They're often my real bedtime reads, the books that I read last thing at night when I just need to completely unwind from any of the stress of the day and get ready for sleep. So I thought I'd share a few favorites with you. First up is The School at the Chalet by Eleanor M. Brentdyer. Sadly, this is now out of print, although I think it will definitely come back into print next year because 2025 will mark the 100th anniversary from when this book was first published in 1925, and Girls Gone By publishers will, I'm sure, bring out a new edition of The School at the Chalet for that year. This edition is one of the Girls Gone By editions that they've previously republished. It's the first in the Chalet School books by Eleanor Brentdyer. I read these books when I was very little and I absolutely adored them. They're a boarding school series about a boarding school that starts out in Austria and then moves to the Channel Islands, then to the UK, and then to Switzerland. I myself went to an international school in Switzerland for several years of my education as a child, and I think these books especially spoke to me for that reason. But I still love to return to them now as an adult. And then a real favourite of mine that I've sort of rediscovered again quite recently is the Jill books by Ruby Ferguson. I read and loved these as a child, but earlier this year, I think it was, I started reading them again after I interviewed Eva Rice, the author of The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets, and she was talking about how much she adored the Jill Pony books. So I started reading them again, and they're just so funny. They're so much fun. They've been real comfort reads for me over this past year, returning to them. So I had to give them a mention. If you love pony books, then the Jill books are absolute classics of that genre. And I think they make brilliant reading, even if you're an adult. And then another book that I reread this year was Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. And I love Anne of Green Gables. It's a book I've returned to many times over my life. But this year I've been enjoying reading all of the Anne books again. I think, ever read all of them apart from the first two once. So Anne of Green Gables and Anne of Avonlea I've both read quite a few times, but I only ever read the whole series once when I was a lot younger. And it's been really fun returning to them again. I'm now just about to start the last two, Rainbow Valley and then Rillet of Ingleside, and then I'll finish my reread of them all this year. And it's been such a fun project. Honestly, if you want a really nice comfort book project, then I really recommend reading all of the Anne books. They're just such wonderful stories, and yes, there's some sadness, there's some heartbreak in the books, but in general they are just so life-affirming and so wonderful, so magical and enriching. I think you just can't go wrong with these books if you want wonderful comfort reads. And then an American classic I love are the Betsy Tacy books by Maud Hart Lovelace. This is the first in the series, Betsy Tacy. The first few books are for much younger readers, but then From Heaven to Betsy onwards is what nowadays you would call YA books, and adults can really enjoy them as well. I love especially going back to Betsy's high school books, and then onwards from that when she goes off for a year traveling around Europe and then finally gets married. I really love to return to those books a lot. And Heaven to Betsy starts off her beginnings in high school, so I do return to this book and the others. But I would also like to go back right to the beginning of the series and reread all of them straight through. Maybe that'll be my project next year. Having done the Anne books this year, I think I should do the Betsy Tacy ones next year. But yes, that will be a delight because these are always wonderful comfort reads for me. And then if you are really having a bit of a bad day, then I always say the best cure is to pick up Winnie the Pooh, draw yourself a lovely hot bath, use some nice bubble baths, and just have a wonderful soak and read Winnie the Pooh. And I do think that that will cure many ills in this world. I love this edition, which has colour illustrations by Ernest Shepherd, and it's just so beautifully done. There's a lot of wisdom, in a way, I think, to be found in the Winnie the Pooh stories. Adults can actually get so much from these books, and I think they just can't fail to cheer you up. So this is a real comfort classic for me. And then another children's book I adore is The Little White Horse by Elizabeth Goudge. Elizabeth Goudge generally is a wonderful comfort book writer. I love her adult novel, The City of Bells, but this was a book that I read as a child, and I'll never forget the first time I read it. I was 9 years old. We were living for a while in Chicago at that time, and I think my mum had found this book in one of the local bookshops for me, and I just could not put it down. I just loved escaping into this magical world that Elizabeth Goudge created, and it's one of the first books I have very, very vivid memory of reading and just absolutely falling in love with the whole world of the novel. So this will always be a comfort read for me, and it just takes me right back to my childhood self, which is quite special about it too. Now, Little Women is obviously a comfort classic. It was so much fun rereading this for the Comfort Book Club last Christmas, and it was just such a joy to read this book, but it's one that I often return to and will return to in the future. It's just a wonderful, comforting read for me. And then finally, I wanted to share The Wind Boy by Ethel Cook Elliott. This was a book that I'd read as a child, and I had a few memories of it, but I'd completely forgotten the title and the author. But then my mum just recently remembered it for me and got me a copy, and I was so happy to be able to read this book again. And so many memories of my first time reading it really came back to me as I read it. If you like Elizabeth Goudge and you like books that have a bit of that magic and whimsy to them, then definitely give The Wind Boy a try. It's definitely one to enjoy. If you like Elizabeth Goudge, then I think it's well worth picking this up. It's a really charming, sweet story. But anyway, I could go on and on with even more book recommendations, but I'd better stop there. But I hope you've enjoyed my comfort book suggestions. Do leave a comment telling me what is your ultimate comfort read, which is the book that you turn to over and over again when you're in need of comfort. I'd really love to know. But thank you so much for watching this video. Extra big thanks to those of you who pressed the super thanks button on my last video. I always so appreciate your amazing support. But thank you to everyone who supports my work by subscribing to my channel, liking the videos, leaving a comment, and of course watching them. I really appreciate your support as well. And I hope you've got a lovely weekend coming up and filled with some wonderful books and time to read them. But I'll see you again on Sunday. In fact, I have an extra video coming for you this week. So do check back to my YouTube channel on Sunday, as there'll be an extra video then. Goodbye.